Hello, friends of the podcast, and welcome to Directionally Correct, a people analytics podcast with your hosts, Cole Napper, and today's guest, Nick Kennedy, CEO of the Workforce Planning Institute. In this episode, we will cover what the State of Workforce Planning Profession Report reveals. You guys actually recently published a report called The State of Workforce Planning. Why securing executive buy-in for strategic workforce planning remains stubbornly hard. To do SWP right, you have to be interfacing with the senior-most leaders in an organization. How the golden triangle of people analytics, talent intelligence, and strategic workforce planning is converging.
I would argue that maybe you're almost the pioneer of what I've eventually called the golden triangle.
The entrepreneurial story behind founding of a global professional body from scratch. What has that been like, just being the founder of a company, trying to create a professional body, and much more. Now let's get down to business. Hey, Directionally Correct fans. This podcast is dedicated to you to help democratize people intelligence for the world of work. If you're looking to support the podcast, please make sure to listen weekly, subscribe to the Directionally Correct Substack newsletter, sign up for the Data-Driven HR Academy at datadrivenhracademy.com, purchase Cole's book, People Analytics, or check out everything else at colenapper.com. Before we get into it, a quick word about HR Bench, the company powering this podcast. You know, when we all started in people analytics, we wanted to do strategic work, building predictive models, workforce planning, advising the C-suite, and most of all, quantifying the impact for the business. Instead, we spend months building dashboards and reports that should already exist. HR Bench eliminates that entire phase. Your HRIS connects, your metrics calculate, your benchmarks populate. This is not novel. This is day one, not quarter two. That means skipping straight to prescriptive analysis, storytelling, and taking action for the business. Want to learn more? Book a demo at hrbench.com/directionallycorrect. Find out more about the company powering this podcast and building the future of people intelligence. As always, all opinions are our own, and thanks for being a listener. Well, Nick, this has been a long time coming. Thanks for joining me today.
Man, I was so excited to be here. We've been talking about it for, dare I say, years?
Yeah, it's been years.
Yeah,
so I'm glad we could finally get you on here. I appreciate you being willing. And I think it's the perfect time, really. I feel like workforce planning is having a moment. When you kicked off the SWP conference a few weeks ago up in Chicago, you talked about like how this appears to be a moment, and you really, I see you as kind of a forerunner in this space. You guys actually recently published a report called The State of Workforce Planning. Can you cover maybe some of the high points of that research about like what's going on in the field right now? What makes it so relevant?
Yeah, it's a great question, and we're really excited about that report. It was driven, Cole, by just some really fundamental kind of requests we've been getting from our members. Even some of the basic stuff, like what does a typical workforce planning team size look like? Like how many, per head count are there rules of thumb? And so we thought, well, let's go and ask our community and then bring that in as part of a broader research project. So what we found in that regard is that there isn't a consistent team size. We've got a significant variability. We've got instances where organizations with 10,000 have teams of 6, and then organizations with 300 have teams of 1.5, right? So there's huge variability in there, but we're trying to create a visual there. We're seeing over the last 5 years that through job ad data that the profession is absolutely growing. We saw it spike during COVID significantly, especially in the US, and then it dropped away fairly sharply directly after. But those numbers have recovered now to pre-COVID times. We've seen really significant growth in Asia Pac. We're at 166% of the pre-COVID numbers from a job ad perspective. So we're seeing some really interesting and diverse regional growth.
What's so different about APAC?
Yeah,
Just out of curiosity.
It's a good question. I don't know. The only thinking is, was it lagging to begin with, and is it
Hmm.
is it catching up? Right? Have the advent of some more vocal voices around SWP brought it on in leaps and bounds? We also find, and I'm not necessarily attributing this to us, but we find it's much easier to educate and train locally because there's no travel required for a face-to-face style. So we get a lot more training volume in this part of the world. Um, Other than that, I think our governments are relatively open to addressing the aging population, aging workforce conundrum. So different funding models available. So there's a few different variables. Australia's always had Australia in particular within APAC's always had it's been a breeding ground for SWP related talent.
Yeah.
Um, the
Well,
the
I give you credit for some of that at least,
well,
if not all.
some of it, but like Alicia Roach, for example, the Equate team, they've been born out of half of those have been born out of Australia. Peter Howes, the original Success Factors crew, they're from this part of the world. So there's been something in the water down in this
Yeah.
part of the world. What else are we seeing in the report? We're seeing job growth. We're seeing some really interesting and diverse models in implementation in SWP. So, we're seeing a centralized models evolve and grow to federated models. So most organizations will start their implementation with an SWP related hub, a center of excellence, and deliver from there, but then trying to push that out and evolve responsibility and accountability to the business, but still remain sort of centralized from an SME and advice and support point of view. So we see very few truly decentralized models. We see quite a lot of federated models and still got some centralized models there. Nobody believes themselves from a maturity standpoint. Nobody believes themselves yet to be truly expert across all of the areas that we look at. Which that's not a surprise, right? We're navigating this relatively new discipline together. So I'm almost of the opinion that very few people genuinely should carry the tag of SWP expert. There are some that I know around the world, absolutely, but it's one of those ones that we will get there together eventually. So nobody rated themselves in the expert category for systems, processes, and technology, right? So no one feels like they've got the tech utilization piece completely down pat. And nobody feels like yet they're educating themselves in the space of SWP to an elite level. The education models differ significantly, but we're still finding that most people, Cole, are learning by doing and learning on the job,
Hmm.
as opposed to implementing some sort of a formal, education program, which we find really interesting. What else can I tell you? Is there anything else that you pulled out of the report that you wanted me to talk more on
Yeah,
specifically?
you kind of started with it, and I saw this, and maybe I was misinterpreting it, but it looked like the median team size for organizations that had 50 to 100,000 employees was actually the largest. So companies that were bigger than that had a median size that was lower. I think it was around 5 people
Yeah.
if you had more than 100,000 employees, but I think it was a median size of 8 people if you were 50 to 100,000 employees, and then obviously less than that with less employees. I was just curious, why do you think there's kind of that middle ground in terms of team size?
I think that those really large orgs, and I don't actually know who's in that data set, right? They're the
Sure,
individuals,
exactly.
but we're talking about the likes of Amazon, Walmart, the really, really big companies. I think most of them are really still caught up in operational workforce planning. And
Yeah.
so they're yet to really tackle the potentially daunting task of implementing SWP. Whereas those mid-size organizations, it's funny referring to a 100,000 person business as a mid-size organization,
Yeah,
isn't
I
it?
know they're huge.
a lot of them have been doing it for years. So in that band, you're going to have organizations like, and I'm taking a sample based on what I know outside of the survey data, like the pharmaceutical companies, like the Roches, like the banks. So,
Yeah.
Standard Chartered, NatWest, Lloyds, these sorts of companies that we know have been doing SWP for a long
Hmm.
period of time. And they won't say they've got it all figured out, but have relatively mature functions. So I would say that it's been a less daunting task for some of those organisations to tackle. So they've been onto it for longer.
Yeah.
Therefore, they've matured the function and recognised that perhaps they do need a few more heads in there.
I have a hypothesis. I'm curious if you how you react to this. My thought on it when looking at it was those companies I think are too big. They're too big because it's a spans and layers problem. Whereas to do SWP right, you have to be interfacing with the senior most leaders in an organization. And at large organizations, there's just too many layers between an SWP team and the senior leaders to adequately do that. And so it just kind of gets snuffed out a
Yeah.
little bit of the business. Whereas at smaller organizations, I know we're not a 50,000 person company is not a small organization, but at smaller organizations, there's actually less layers. And so
Yeah.
you can actually have the interface between the leaders of SWP and the executive team at that organization.
Yeah. So I love the thinking, and where I see that is when we're training organizations in capability mapping, right? We're looking at a process
Mhm.
to identify strategically critical capabilities. The question comes up: what's the stakeholder cohort to gather this information? What's the right one? It's your executive, but then we understand that different organizations are going to have different access to that executive, and often, Cole, that's a function of size. And it sounds wrong, but it is, because the larger the organization, the more spans, the more layers in there, the more difficult it is to get access to the very top of that tree. So taking that thinking, because sometimes you see the heart sink when you and if not the executive, then the next highest level. So I would agree with the fact that as you become larger and become more complex, that access absolutely
Mhm.
it drops away.
Well, let's talk about the SWP conference. So first of all, I want to say a big thank you for having me attend. I was able to be there for a day. I thought it was just excellent. I hadn't been in 3 years since I chaired it a few years ago, so appreciated that. And at just seeing the growth, the excitement, the relevant topics, just the stars that were there, I just want to say it was absolutely excellent. Can you talk a little bit about that evolution of that conference? And I know you've actually expanded it around the globe. So, you've got the London one, you've got the Sydney one, and you're even expanding into kind of other territories as well. So, talk about that journey if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, it's been different in different locations. So London, we have never really struggled to grow it. London, I
Mm,
think because of proximity to Europe and travel and all these sorts of things throughout the last 5 years, where travel's been a bit more difficult. London's been relatively easy is not the right term, but less arduous. So the US, as you know, we started in San Diego. It was a small conference,
mhm,
circa 100 people. It grew a little bit when we moved it to Austin, and then we moved it to Chicago. And I think one of the critical things there is we've now anchored it to Chicago, which
mhm.
we've learned over time that when you have a home, conferences tend to grow a little bit more readily. So part of it's finding the right the right part of the US to optimize everybody's travel journeys, right? To make sure that,
Yeah.
not too many people are flying across the country and so on and so forth. So that's been a part of it. Um, but we have seen a real maturation of the content, the sessions, the engagement over that journey as well. So we used to see far more variability in SWP capability in the US. So we used to see a cavernous gap between the elite, those that were doing it super well. People like AJ Herman and his task-based approach to SWP, right from the early days, spring to mind. Right, I remember that session
Yeah, I do.
popping on the San Diego stage. Versus those that were just starting out. I think that gap seems to be closing a little bit,
Mhm.
just due to the sheer size of some of the organisations and horsepower. We still see a bit of variability. So there's a maturing of the profession and the aggregate capability that I'm seeing happening, which is reflecting in the sessions and the sort of content that we're um, being shown. Also, the organisations that we're getting access to. I know that we did have a pretty impressive list of brands in San Diego, but you look at some of the sessions from this time around, like the session from Target, the session from McDonald's. They were fantastic. So we're seeing people are starting to recognise the event as a thing, and therefore that's more conducive. Yeah, I'll come and speak if it's got some credibility behind it. So that's growing. Sydney was Australia was the same story. We moved it around for the first couple of years. We anchored it to Sydney. Lo and behold, it started to grow. In London, what we've flagged is something that I no doubt you and I are going to talk a little bit more about. Is perhaps an acknowledgement of a number of very, very intimately interconnected disciplines or sub disciplines. Through the fact that the sort of speakers on our conference stage bear titles that are pretty diverse. Not everyone has a strategic workforce planning director VP title. Some people are from people analytics, some people are from talent, some people are from workforce development, workforce strategy. It's diverse, and so we thought we'd acknowledge that, and we'd expand our conference within an existing footprint. So yeah, one day we will go into new locations. I've got no doubt about that. And new locations are asking for us to come and run conferences there. So
Yeah.
Dubai, Germany, the subcontinent, India. We are
Mhm.
getting requests. Can you come and run here? There's risk in that for any company, right? So we'll grow our existing event portfolio first. So in London, we have added 2 new conferences, and they are, strictly speaking, different conferences because of the fact that we don't want to dilute the sanctity of SWP, right? As the professional body for strategic workforce planning, we don't want to. We hold that in high regard. However, we have added people analytics, data, and AI as a separate event, and we've added talent, learning, and capability. So yeah, we will all meet in one room for one session, right? For one plenary. Then we will break out, and all of those conferences will be accessible on a single ticket and interconnected by a single exhibition, single vendor space.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's bold, and I love the move. I think that's excellent because I think you even kind of coined this phrase, the golden triangle, of bringing those things together. And I've been talking about how people analytics, workforce planning, talent intelligence, and behavioral science are converging into one, and what I'm calling people intelligence.
Yeah.
Do you kind of see those two things as fellow travelers of sorts with one another?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to be honest, Kyle, I don't see any difference. And I would argue that maybe you're almost the pioneer of what I've eventually called the golden triangle through our previous conversations
Mhm.
around, are these really different disciplines, and are these do they really even need different tags? So sure, we can give them different tags, but I don't think there's huge importance to anchor the sanctity of each of those as a unique discipline, right? I think they are all so intimately connected, and I've long been a believer that the natural evolution of talent acquisition should be more towards data collection and insights into SWP, if not evolving into that space, right? The way that we access capability and fill jobs is shifting, and I'd love to see that that job title, that job role in particular, shift more towards, hey, this is what we're hearing when we're on the phone to
Yeah.
candidates. This is our live data feed, right, from the one-to-one conversation. So I've been a huge fan of that. People analytics, again, like the world is shifting from dashboards and information historically to, well, what does that mean in terms of the future, and what other models can we look at to help us understand the different future scenarios, and peer into the future, not necessarily with laser like accuracy, but here's what could occur. So I think they're all absolutely intimately connected. Interestingly, in the behavioral science, on that front, we are seeing more sessions around that.
Mhm.
In SWP. In Sydney, we've invited along actually a neuropsychologist to come and talk to us around how the brain works in terms of relationship building and stakeholder influencing. And to me, that's an endorsement of your views that
Yeah.
behavioral science is absolutely intimately connected to that triangle. So I I don't think there actually even needs to be a triangle, but we're pushing for it because there's still perhaps a human need to differentiate and
Yeah.
delineate between these disciplines.
It's a distinction without a difference sometimes. Yeah, for sure.
It's a distinction without a difference. I love the phrase. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. One of the, I mean, honestly, the biggest takeaway I had from the SWP conference was one of the leaders that does SWP for the New Zealand Navy
Yep.
talked about how, because I asked the question, I was like, "What's like something secret that nobody knows about here?" And a few of the presenters answered the question, but she had something that the Five Eyes countries, so New Zealand, Australia, UK, Canada, United States, from a military perspective, are now doing cross collaboration for workforce planning practices, which I thought was fascinating. But it also shows the implications that this work matters on a global scale,
Mm.
right? That's like really important information. So the question I have for you is, what are you seeing in terms of, you've got these three conferences in three different continents? What are you seeing in terms of the differences in trends in workforce planning in Australia, in the US, in Europe? Like what's different and what's the same?
It's a good question. Um, it's funny, because we tend to see Kevin and Sue from Deloitte stand up day day one, session one in the US, and often that narrative is set and influenced, right?
Mhm.
So last year it was agentic AI. This year it was kind of more the global trends, but also into the skills, jobs, tasks to outcomes kind of piece. So they get the chance to set that narrative, and in many ways, that the US does. It's the first conference of the year, right? So we get the first look at what's happening. Um, Trends wise, there are absolutely some commonalities. So you do see, very very similar um, trends emerging across those three events. So the good news is that we are all talking about similar stuff. I think the local geopolitical landscapes and local economies do impact and
Mhm.
influence the narrative, right? So the
Yeah.
degree of uncertainty, the degree to which we're needing to plan for contingency, I think that's really strong at the moment in the US in particular. It's less so locally. In Australia, we have probably a higher degree of certainty that governments will change. So I think some of those government-based organisations in Australia they're really thinking about a rapid shift in what we would need to plan for.
Mhm.
Under the Australian government tends to shift a lot, right, from party to party. So that's a concern for them. Um, the hospital and healthcare systems are really different in each of those three parts of the world. So in the US, we see a far more commercially astute private health contribution, whereas in the UK and Australia, we see that far more publicly focused. So some of those things are interesting and different. We also see a lot of cross global collaboration. So yeah, the New Zealand Navy and the work that we've done with the Australian Navy was what led to them sort of talking to us about training. So
Mhm.
they do chat. Um, we will put people in contact with each other from different parts of the world based on common problems. How do we make sense of Workday Adaptive is the most common one, right? So we'll get an insurance company in Australia to go and speak to, I don't know, a defense company in the
Sure.
US to understand how they've implemented those sort of things. So in many ways there are some differences, but in many ways we're also working together to solve common problems.
Well, I think it's really great that you have positioned, the Workforce Planning Institute to be that connective tissue, right? And you guys have put out excellent content. Obviously, you're kind of building the skills in the profession before our eyes, which I think is needed, especially at a key moment like now. And you've also even got your own podcast. I got graciously got to be a guest in there. I think a year and a half, 2 years ago. It was a little while ago, but can you talk a little all about the Workforce Planning Institute and your podcast and just what you guys are doing to build skills in the arena of SWP?
Yeah, it's a great question. I guess one of the things that I'm really passionate about is as a former practitioner. I used to love doing what I did and helping organizations with SWP. But one of the things I found out really quickly is that there's no one right way to do this, and there's lots of really good ways to do it, and many of them are suited to certain organizations, and making things even more convoluted. Bits and pieces of each of those methodologies are well suited to certain organizations. So I guess the institute has never told anyone how to do anything at any point in time. All it's
Yeah,
ever
I feel like there are right ways, or there are many right ways, but there are wrong ways. like,
there
like
are
you can
definitely
do this
wrong
that
ways.
way.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and no way is
yeah.
the absolute the epicenter of wrong ways, right? So not doing it at all is certainly something that we'd advise against. But we wanted to understand what's done out there, and then work to democratize that for the world. So you're taking the best bits of what the experts say out there. How does Adam Gibson do this, and how does Alicia Roach do this, and
Mhm.
what's Cole's views on the way that these disciplines interconnect, all those sorts of things. It's about taking that thinking from those that are proven to have done it well, pulling it together and saying, well, here's what we know, and here's how we can help evolve and customize that for you over time, right? So that your approach and your methodologies have got some rigor and some structure, and don't have too many of those wrong ways creeping in. But at the same time, you're able to be empowered to
Mhm.
to do it in a way that works for you. So here's a bunch of fundamentals. Take the best bits of each of those approaches and customize it. So that's probably one of the first the first fundamentals is ask before you tell. Right. That's really what I wanted to make sure we've got in place. And from there, I mean, it's really about you know giving professionals acknowledgement for what they do, giving
Mhm.
them a home base, giving them an event or a platform or a set of guidelines to anchor themselves to, so that they can shine. It's also been about providing education pathways so that professionals can have their experience or their education recognized. Really, we want to make SWP a thing, Kyle. It's
Mhm.
we've known it's a thing, but we want everyone else to look at us and go, yeah, we get you. You're a thing, and that's been a huge part of it. So that's really what prompted it to be established. Is how do we recognize the incredible professionals in the space for what they do, and keep them in the space for as long as we can. I think SWP has been subject to the voluntold strategic workforce planner, the accidental strategic workforce planner, as Kath Hume described, I think in London last year. She did a session. She's our head of learning. She did a session on this is what
Yeah,
happens when you're thrust into it. Here's a
that's been
suite of
great.
tools. Yeah. So I think, many of us have been there, right? And there's been no quintessential pathway into SWP. And to that end, we want to take that and make some changes to that and formalize it so that it is a bona fide profession, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And I think you guys are putting together all the building blocks to make that possible, which I think is great. But I mean, this has been an entrepreneurial journey for you as well, because there was, there was a time where this didn't exist,
Yeah.
right? And what has that been like, just being the founder of a company, trying to create a professional body, doing it in a global way, not just a local way? What has that journey been like, and what have you learned through that experience?
Yeah, it's just I don't get asked about the commercial side or the entrepreneurial side of my
Well, can I,
journey
can
a
I
lot.
actually pause you there for a second?
Yeah.
Because I think it's like no one asked about it as far as I can tell. Like
Yeah.
no one asked me about it. No one asked a lot of the other kind of thought leaders in this space. They're really kind of sticking their necks out to do this type of thing. And I think they should,
Yeah.
because this is a key pillar in the community about what makes the world go round. Is I always think of it like a three-legged stool. You've got your practitioners, you've got your vendors, and then you've got your educators who are building the next generation of talent as well. And all of those three need to be working in lockstep. And we act like practitioners are the only ones that matter, and that's not the case. And so I'm really glad that you're getting an opportunity to share this.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, you just described really the ecosystem, haven't you?
Mm-hmm.
Which we see is super important. So I guess maybe I'll take you back to how it all started really quickly. I was a practitioner. I had a consulting firm called Deliberate Edge that was strategic workforce planning advisory. It was just me plus associates. We used to do projects for small to mediums, delivering strategic workforce plans. And I enjoyed that. I always had a training program sitting there that I offered as well. And then COVID hit and things got tight. And I remember, really looking for those sort of formally released requests for tender from government departments and those sort of things. And I saw one that I thought was right in my hitting zone. It was a small job, was perfectly suited to my skills, and I didn't think that a lot of the top end of town would be putting their hats in the ring for that. And then whoever was running the tender, perhaps a bit of a slip of the finger, accidentally replied with a reject letter to all in a CC'd manner, not a BCC manner. And I'm not going to name any names, but some of the companies on that list, some of the email domains on that list were right at the top end of advisory around locally around Australia. And I thought, well, if that's the space that if that's my competition, I don't want to compete anymore. So, in the spirit of Michael Porter, one of the forefathers of contemporary
Mm-hmm.
strategy, my question was, well, what business are you in? I sat there and I said, what business are you in? And it wasn't SWP advisory. It was, you're in the workforce strategy, strategic workforce planning game. Okay, so how do I avoid having that level of competition, and how do I stop chasing the bigger projects and programs? How do I create a level of annuity and certainty in a community minded manner? And that's really what led to the birth of the institute. Was don't compete, don't collaborate, and turn your competitors into customers, essentially. And that was
Mm-hmm.
really the thinking behind it. In terms of global, it didn't make sense to start with Australia and then expand. And maybe I'm pretty outlandish and pretty bold in terms of my approach. So maybe that's my natural sort of blue sky thinking coming through, and why stop there when But then I thought, well, there's so much value out there. There's so much to be learned and to be gained. Why don't we start with the principle of sharing things on a global scale? So we went global from the outset, as opposed to trying to grow something domestically and then expand it. I also didn't think, based on sort of LinkedIn searches around the number of professionals in certain areas, back when LinkedIn showed you the number of hits that were in a in a search response, I don't think there was enough of a market locally to sustain a whole business. So
Mhm.
that was what was part of the thinking behind going global. But at the center of it has always been, um, the values of the company, and its support, connect, grow, and enable the global SWP community. It's never been about a commercial venture. It's never been about that. And I think, if you lead with purpose, and this is, Simon Sinek's right when he talks about, the organizations that lead with purpose. I genuinely believe that everything else follows. If you lead with that, that's been part of the emerging success of the institute.
I mean, that's great. Um, One of the things I do prepping for the podcast, I always ask people, what are some idiosyncratic or interesting things about you? And
Here we go.
you shared some pretty wild stuff that, frankly, I feel like I'd be like violating HIPAA laws if I made you share it. But is there anything about you? We can cut this part out if you want me to. But is there anything you wanted to share about idiosyncratic or interesting things about you, Nick?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I'm one of those people with a couple of nipples. Cole, I got a superfluous that's growing down below there. So there you go. There's about as close and personal as we can get. Yeah, I think we talked about. I've got an interesting condition called sleep paralysis, which I have under control now, but is a situation where you become conscious. So in the middle of your sleep cycle, you become conscious and aware, but you are completely unable to move. So imagine sort of essentially waking up and not being able to move a muscle in your body. Um, and it's incredibly scary, incredibly scary. And I've seen specialists all over the world for this. And one of the neuroscientists I saw as part of it had a theory that it's potentially, um, not helped, right, or brought on. So that the condition isn't helped, but the actual instances are brought on by, even a small amount of alcohol in the evenings. So his theory was, a glass of wine, for example, might be enough to blur the lines between sleep and awake. And it's interesting because I cut it out of my life completely, which, is something I used to enjoy a lot. But I cut it out of my life, and the condition is essentially completely at bay. So, um, I know that's not a purely a scientific, a proof of concept, but it seems to work for me.
Yeah.
It's got other unintended consequences. Like I'm a morning person, so I wake at normally starts with a 4. Um, and I will sit there and churn out a few hours of work while my brain's at its absolute sharpest before the yeah life's blessings start to creep in and impact the rest of the day. So kids, team members needing stuff, those sort of things. So that's meant that I can do that and exploit that time when my brain works. My brain shuts down at about 3 o'clock. So if my team asks me something at 3:30, my eyes will pop out of my head and I'll say, well, I'll give you a much better answer at 7 a.m. tomorrow. So I'll think about it then for you.
Well, I appreciate you even doing this podcast because I'm based in the United States, and I know this is Saturday morning, pretty early your time in Australia. So thank you so much. We're catching you at your prime hours, Nick.
That's okay. Like I actually went to, so I had a really weird day yesterday. I went to bed at like 7:15, and woke up at 4:30. So I got almost 9 hours of sleep, which for me is rare. I ashamedly so, by the way, Cole. I'm one of those people who's been a 5 to 6 hour a night kind of
Yeah.
person for a long time, and I'm trying to change that. And certainly, as as the pressures of running a global business are almost off my own shoulders, because we've been able to grow and put in place a wonderful managing director and incredible team. The sleep equation is starting to improve. But yeah, I wouldn't have been otherwise sleeping. I'd be at the gym, or I'd be up working to try and catch the back end of the US day.
Absolutely. Well, Nick, do you want to join me in Cole's Corner?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go.
Welcome to Cole's Corner. All right, well, let's start out with some rapid fire.
Okay.
If you weren't into SWP as a profession, what would you have done with your career?
I would have become a host on Top Gear.
Oh, really?
I love cars. I love the automotive space. I would have. That's my dream job, is to be there with Jeremy Clarkson, James May, and yeah, the other chaps, and just driving and chatting cars and having good fun. Yeah, absolutely.
You were made for it. What's the place you've never been to that you most like to go, and why?
It will be in Italy. So I love Italy. I love all things Italian. Food, coffee, cars. I would like to go to. I've never been to Lake Como, to that region. Yeah, in Italy. I'd also like to drive the regions between France, Italy, and France. I'd love to do that coastal. Go and rent I don't know, some sort of nice Italian thing, and an Alfa Romeo or something, and do that on the road. That'd be pretty cool.
I had this idea the other day. So I was watching this video, and this is not in Italy, but there's this city called Manaus. It's in the middle of the Amazon rainforest, and literally you can't get there by road or by boat or you have to fly in there. Like it's a city of like 2 million people, but it's in the middle of the Amazon. And there's this one road that goes north. And so if you wanted to drive, because it's in Brazil, if you wanted to drive from Sao Paulo, Brazil to Manaus, you would actually have to drive through like 17 different countries
Oh, wow.
just to go back there. And I was like, that would be the funnest thing to drive.
Yeah, it'd be cool.
Right. If you're going to drive something, that would probably be the cool. You probably see more mountains, more tropical rainforest, more climates, more everything on that type of drive. So I was like, maybe that's a bucket list item or something. That would be really fun.
Yeah. It's a shame that they don't stamp passports like they used to, because that would be a nice little memento of, And I only realised that the other day, because my passport must have so many stamps in it. I'm looking through it, it's got none. Oh, yeah, they don't do it anymore.
That's kind of weird. All right, that was not so rapid, but I got one more rapid fire for you. If you were a character in any book, TV show, or movie, who would you be and why?
Oh, Mr. Incredible.
Okay, I like that. Why him?
Because I'm kind of a bigger guy, so I'd like an excuse to carry a little bit more. Because his heart's in the right place, but sometimes maybe he's not always right.
I mean, yeah, that's a good answer. That's a really good answer, Dave.
Thanks. Hey, I got a question for you as part of Cole's Corner.
Sure. What is it?
What is your greatest professional fear?
Mm.
And you can fire it back to me if you like. I'll do you the same courtesy.
Most people would say public speaking, but I speak publicly all the time, and that's not an issue at all. I'm trying to think, like, what is it? Because it's not failure, because I've done a lot of that too. Probably is going to sound kind of silly, because like I don't mind people not liking me, but I really don't like it when people I like don't like me.
Oh, yeah.
And so if like somebody I admired and respected I lost credibility in their eyes, that's my biggest fear probably.
Yeah,
What would you say yours is, Nick?
Mate, I've taken on the onus of driving the SWP profession, right? So that's a big weight, and so not getting there, letting the global SWP profession down by not achieving what we want to achieve, by the time I check out. Now, I don't think that'll happen, and I absolutely think, I'm the person to help. But at the same time, like, what if we fail? What if we don't?
Yeah.
Because organizations fail all the time. Like, we're still seeing companies put all of their SWP chips in the middle, and a few
Mhm.
years later, hasn't worked for us. We're going to sheepishly collect them all back out again. And so, how do we stop that? How do we make sure that we
Yeah.
help these organizations make it stick? So for me, I've got a massive, massive agenda, and that's what drives me is just do not let these amazing
Yeah.
professionals down.
Actually related to the one big question I have for you as a part of Cole's Corner, which is when I talk to the people I consider to be the top people in workforce planning globally, and I always ask them like, who's the top workforce planning team or who's got it down pat or who's most mature, they always say no one.
Yeah. Okay.
Right? They say no one's there. No one's at Nirvana. And if you ask that in people analytics over time, they could name names. If you asked it in talent intelligence, they could name names. But workforce planning
Mm.
has never had this like pinnacle team or teams out there that have achieved the end state of being fully mature.
Yeah.
My question for you is, what do you think is holding the field back from getting to that level of maturity?
Okay. So great question. One, is there a full maturity? Because it's
Okay.
constantly evolving. So I'd challenge it by saying, it's the relentless pursuit of excellence that I would define, the best performing teams by, as opposed to the are we there yet? Are we at the end state? And the teams that I feel pursue excellence in a really, really constructive way would be teams like RTX, right? Who
Mhm.
are committed to training their own people in their own methodologies and own approaches. And as you know, we've done case studies on this. So yeah, they've always been all in. They've always been, how do we best do this? How do we best improve? The Roche team led by Marika Cheney in Europe are really, really capable, all in. They have their own, forums and discussion forums and education forums. They do things really, really well. So there are organizations who pursue it with a rigor that I would admire and acknowledge. And for me, that's actually what matters. Is not how do you know when you're there. It's, are we sure that we're constantly pursuing the end state, regardless of whether we get there or not?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's do some what am I reading? And so I got a few articles. I sent you four. I think we're just going to do three of them today, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
Um, the first one I've got is called Strategic Workforce Planning Starts with HR Itself by Jean-Paul Lucassen. And he goes through, he says, you can't plan the workforce if you can't model your own. Which I think, and so he's talking about you can't model HR's own capacity and its own ability to operate effectively. And so he says, at first glance, because he puts forward a formula for how to do this effectively. He said it looks like just like another ratio, but it isn't. It forces you to articulate assumptions that are left implicit usually. How many employees can one FTE in your business partner team realistically support? How much support does a team actually require? How much work sits close to the business versus in a centralized hub? And kind of many other questions here. And so I wanted to get your thoughts on this one. And if you had any thoughts about just how doing, you ever heard the expression, the cobbler's children have no shoes, meaning HR doesn't even really support its own self with workforce planning. So how could it be supporting the business with workforce planning as well?
Yeah. So some of the most difficult stakeholders to convince that SWP is a good thing are business partners.
Mm-hmm.
And I see this all the time. And this is not
Well, why is that?
it's not an indictment on their strategic thinking capacity. It's they are some of the most busy and under the pump professionals that you're ever likely to meet. And what they do for a living is they deal with other people's dirty laundry. Right? They're putting out spot fires left, right, and center. So the very nature of that function is operational, day to day, fix this problem 5 minutes ago. And so for us then to expect that they're going to buy into an activity that looks 3 years out, 5 years out, it's constantly moving, strategic, it's it's not, they're not incentivized that way. They're not being asked to do that in their day to day. So we need to provide them with a vehicle to think strategically and an opportunity and the headspace to think strategically. So when you get a BP in the training room for 2 days where they've got clear headspace, the shift in their thinking, they walk out of the room, the virtual room or the physical room, lighter and thankful for the ability just to think that way. So I think we've got to afford our HR people the opportunity to be strategic and to think strategic and to learn some of this stuff rather than just expect that they're going to do it.
Absolutely. Well, actually, I have more comments, but I'm going to actually save them
Okay.
until we
Okay.
cover this next one because I feel like you've teed it up
Right.
perfectly, which is so Boston Consulting Group published the top 15 HR topics ranked by importance. And they had done this in 2023, and they did it again in 2026 to not only show what are the top 15, but how has the ranking changed in the last 3 years.
Yep.
Number one is people and HR strategy. Number two on the list is strategic workforce planning. I'm going to skip down a little bit. Number 8, which has moved up 7 slots, is talent management and succession planning. Number 13, which has moved up 5 slots, is org development and design. And then coming in at a cool number 15 is people analytics and reporting. Womp womp. Wish it was higher up on the list, but it's not. The reason why I mentioned those 4 in particular, SWP, talent management and succession planning, and org design, and people and HR strategy, is I feel like those 4 things combined make up what anybody, you know how we said that there's multiple ways of doing workforce planning correctly?
Yeah.
Those are the 4 key ways of doing workforce planning correctly, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. Yeah.
And they're all increasing in importance over the last few years. And number 1 and number 2 on the list. Now, isn't that such a contradiction if HR business partners are saying that we don't need to be good at workforce planning if the number 1 and number 2 things are essentially workforce planning and every one of the 4 things that are related to it are on the rise?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So great comment. I'd ask the first 2, are they different? And the fact that organizations,
They're not different.
no, the fact that organizations are still thinking, oh, they are really unique, says a lot. So one of the most common problems of a workforce planner is they'll come in and they'll be given the task of developing a strategic workforce plan, and their chief human resources officer will say, great, here's our people strategy. Start with that as your basis. That is like trying to divide 1 by 0 or any number by 0, right? That's going to create it's going to trend towards infinity. So you cannot do that. They are the same thing. It's just that the people strategy more than likely has been developed without the same level of rigor and structure and strategic connection as a strategic workforce plan would be. So we need to get that out of the modern vernacular. So to the great people at BCG, let's have a think about what those categories look like to create greater delineation in the boxes that people can check. Because I think we need to start to influence that narrative really strongly. And yeah, you're right. The other 2 plus people analytics, right? I don't know that they're that different. I think org development and design, they don't necessarily belong in the same category. I think that's a curious one because org development, I would see far more.
I was thinking more on the org design side as being key, because that's usually a part of the transformation efforts that come as a part of workforce planning.
We see it as a really clear output lever of strategic workforce planning. So when we look at the sort of the 16 buckets that we treat as part of connecting your strategy to your workforce outputs, org and role design sit really clearly as a succinct key consideration as part of it, right? Yeah. So I agree with you there. So they are all absolutely part of that same. Let's go back to the golden triangle, or the workforce intelligence piece, or work intelligence piece, if we want to, be picky about it. So none of those things are surprises. It's pleasing to see that SWP is up that list, but I think we need to start to. We're never going to agree, right? There'll always be 1,000 different surveys that articulate things 1,000 different ways. So if you think about all of them contributing to one big,
Yeah.
popularity barometer, we're heading in the right direction.
Well, I want to add one more thing here, and the topic area that had increased the most since 2023, which is number 12 on the list. It used to be number 25, is digital solutions and HR process automation.
Yep.
Now, I talk a lot about people intelligence and workforce planning, frankly, as a part of that. But the topic that comes up in literally every conversation I have nowadays in my professional life outside of the podcast is AI workforce transformation. And so I think if you lumped in all the topics that we were talking about with people analytics and strategic workforce planning and people in HR strategy, and then you started to include digital solutions, especially automation, this is where AI workforce transformation is kind of a key topic for every HR function globally right now. And I think it's kind of the topic, frankly, of 2026 and onward. What do you think about that?
So I don't know whether you saw this. I did a session in Amsterdam last year, which
I
looked
did.
at how AI would impact 12 HR roles. Right. So I took 12 meat and potatoes, like HR business partner, talent acquisition specialist, people analytics, workforce planner, HR ops specialist. And I had a look at breaking the automation impact down between AI driven and process driven, right? And then we just had a look at AI just to see what would likely happen to these roles in the coming sort of over the next 5 years, just due to AI transformation. And then, all right, if that's going to change, what are the corresponding skills and capabilities that we need to start to arm our workforce with in order to get there? So I think it's one thing for organizations to be concerned about AI and workforce transformation. I don't think that organizations know why they're concerned yet. And sorry, I don't mean to tar everyone with the same, but many organizations aren't
Mm-hmm.
yet really across why they're concerned. But I think, if they're able to break that information down and really look at, all right, what is going to change? What is the work? What are the tasks and duties that are going to change and be
Mm-hmm.
automated? That's fine. What's the corresponding skill and capability shift we need to support and enable over that time frame? Then that equation, that whole AI transformation beast that we're all really concerned about, actually becomes pretty simple. It's not a big thing. As I've said publicly, Cole, I for one welcome our new overlords. I think this is an incredible opportunity for us. And yeah, we need to be cautious, but optimistically cautious, or cautiously optimistic. And it's not something that's that complex. Just understand and examine and explore how that work will change. And there are professionals in this space that are really, really, really good at doing that. So tap into them, get the data, analyze it, and then work with your learning function to build out a plan that ensures you've got the right workforce. And of course, your talent function. So here's who you're now looking for, right?
Mm-hmm.
Here's how we now need to recruit. This is the sort of skills and capabilities we need. Plus, so this is the buy and build, right? We're gonna build differently, but we're gonna buy differently as well in the future. So for me, AI workforce transformation is a fantastic buzz term, but we don't need to be scared about it. We just need to understand it, embrace it, and work towards it.
Be excited. Let's
Yeah,
get with the
exactly.
program.
Exactly.
Absolutely. I have to ask you this question before I pull up the last what am I reading article. But are you a fan of baseball?
I so this is so every time I go to the US, I try and catch a game. Has been unsuccessful for Chicago. I've missed the Sox and the Cubs by half a day each time. So I will buy my children a baseball cap from the local stadium each time. So yes, I like it. I'm not across it as much as I can. But as you probably know, Cole, Moneyball for me is the greatest workforce planning and analytics case study in existence. So I am a fan. My knowledge of it isn't as up to date as it should be, but let's give it a go.
Yeah. No, that's perfect tee up here. I was going to apologize if you weren't familiar because
All good.
this is
All
a
good.
really unfair article to put in front of you. But two friends of the podcast, previous guests, Tyler Weeks and Colby Kennedy Nesbitt, wrote articles in the respective Substacks. So Tyler's is First Principles and Colby's is Variance Explained. And it's called The Usual Stuff Plays: How Competitive Variety is the Key to Modern Talent Strategy. And I would say this article is a continuation on Moneyball. And so what has happened recently is the Tampa Bay Rays have kind of revolutionized the next instantiation of Moneyball, where they're able to, with a much lower salary than other teams, able to start, going really far into the playoffs, if not winning the World Series. And they're able to do this because all the other teams have actually adopted the traditional Moneyball strategy, which I think is kind of a very kind of ironic finding.
Yeah.
And essentially, they're still finding areas where there are market failings because people again are just looking for low cost players that bat above their average. And so they cover a few things here, but they say, how did the Tampa Bay Rays do it? They're hiring for variety. And so instead of everybody looking for who's the best batter that costs less, they're looking for multiple types of pitchers and multiple types of batters and multiple types of fielders and multiple types of ways of positioning people on the field that are creating more variety, but you might even call it chaos. The second point they make is treat configuration as a verb. And so this is it's not just the players on the field, but the configuration of the players is actually an area for competitive advantage to be found.
Yeah.
And then the last area is select for function. So variety and configuration produce a flood of possible configurations. And the final condition is selection. The system has to keep what works and discard what doesn't. So if you have just much more variety in players and you try much more variety in how you actually play those players in terms of the configuration of the roster and the batting order and all that kind of thing, then you can start to wean that down and show for what's most effective. And by doing this, you kind of create this chaos cycle that it makes it very difficult for other teams to replicate and understand. So before I give kind of my meta thought on this article, which I thought was excellent, what was your reactions to it, Nick?
Moneyball only works when not everyone is doing it. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So if you think about, again, I'm going to get back to Michael Porter, his three types of ways to differentiate yourself, and you use the term differentiation there. You've got cost leadership, you've got differentiation, and then you've got niche specialization. So Moneyball says we're going to differentiate the way that we compete to how everybody else does it. Now, the second that everybody else starts doing it, which I think, didn't the Red Sox basically implement it the next year? Didn't John Henry implement it the next year and win? And then everybody else comes along for the ride. Then, of course, everyone's doing the same thing. Now, that's what we've got at the moment in contemporary. Well, we're starting to get out of it, but we've had historically in contemporary talent acquisition. Everybody is looking for the same 5-tool candidate, right? The same 5-tool guy as they were in Moneyball, or girl, as it were. And when everybody's doing it, of course, you're competing for a fundamentally fixed pool of resources, and you push the price up, right? So you create this false economic bubble. So I love the fact that they've looked at that and said, okay, well, what is the next evolution of doing it? I also love the fact that, you mentioned keep what works and remove what doesn't. Right? That's an analogy for, reforecasting, scenario planning, adjusting your plan based on what's shifting, what's moving, what's successful, what's not successful in the market. So my initial thoughts are, you got to keep differentiating yourself, otherwise everyone will catch up.
Yeah. So I want to make a point that the article does not make, but I think is a point that is going to be quite relevant in businesses over the next few years, which is this. What they did was very unconventional. It was so unconventional and so data driven that I don't think any human being on earth would configure enough variety, enough configurations, and enough ways of selecting for those talent, the three pillars that they chose, on their own. I think only a machine, and even like AI powered machines with decision making and kind of like stochastic models and those type of things can put into it, would create the situations that would make this possible. Which means, from a decision making standpoint about the key components of baseball, They've essentially moved out of the hands of a human being and into an AI, right? Which is a key thing that organizations are talking about right now. And my thought is the same is probably true for business decision making. And so organizations are trying more and more to adopt AI. But the one thing that I can see from that I've seen is no businesses are giving up the reins of decision making yet to AI. They're saying we're going to make more data driven decisions. Fundamentally, it's the human in the loop that's going to finally make this decision. And the thing that I think about is what are you going to see in terms of the competitive dynamics of businesses if any businesses actually start to go the Tampa Bay Rays route of taking a human out of the loop, truly doing experimental, crazy, wild things that and in configurations that no human being could ever come to that conclusion on their own, and potentially seeing some, outsized returns as a consequence of that. What will happen to the competitive dynamics in business, much like in baseball?
I think it'll be exactly the same as Moneyball. So those that'll do it will get onto it first, and then there'll be followers, right? And then there'll be everyone's doing the same thing, using a fixed pool of agents. So no one's got access. Well, not too many people have access to agents that aren't democratized, right? And then we'll go back. We'll go full circle. So an organization will say, "Hang on, we've all AI'd this up the yin yang. Let's bring humans back into it. Let's bring emotion back into it. Let's bring feeling back into it. Let's bring culture back into it. Some of the things that maybe are harder for machines to assess. So we will go all in, and AI will start to make decisions for us, and we'll be okay with that because AI will get better at making decisions, and then we'll go full circle. We'll come back out again. That's what I think will happen.
Yeah,
it'll be the hokey pokey.
Well, Nick, did you have any other questions for me? Other topics you want to bring up before we wrap up?
No, I think this has been incredible, Colin. Look, I love what you're doing with the pod, and I've just been absolutely honoured to be a guest here. I'm really excited about what you and I have cooking for bringing your voice to what we're doing and really combining our superpowers. So I think the future is bright for people analytics, workforce planning, talent intelligence, org and role design, all of those sort of interconnected disciplines. So let's make beautiful music together, so to speak.
Let's do it, Nick. And if people want to learn more about you or your organization, where can they find out more information?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I'll connect with anyone in the space on LinkedIn, so that's absolutely fine. If you want to download the report, or you want to have a look at any of our training related or conference related information, it's all on the website. It's just workforceplanninginstitute.com. Easy to get access to. We have now lifetime memberships as a standard, so join up and you never have to worry about it again. That's probably the easiest. Or come and see us at a conference and do the old school thing and walk up and say hello. Nothing makes me happier than those sort of face-to-face discussions.
I love it. Well, you've been a fantastic guest today. Thanks so much for joining me, Nick. You've been listening to Directionally Correct, a People Analytics podcast with your host, Cole Napper, and today's guest, Nick Kennedy. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Cole.